Good morning, guys. How are you today? It's Mrs. Snook. We're going to be starting our new chapter today as we talk about westward expansion. This is going to be chapter 4, and we're going to be talking about a lot of different things this chapter. We're going to talk about, really kind of just in the beginning here, this first week, what made people want to move west, just in general, throughout American history? What would be the urge, the drive to continue moving further west, initially from the East Coast, west of the Appalachian Mountains, into the Midwest, and then eventually, west of the Mississippi River and all the way eventually out to California here. So what would drive people before the Civil War? And then we're really going to be focusing on after the Civil War, who's going west? Are they going west for freedom to escape, racial oppression? Are they going west because they're looking for cheap farmland? Are they going west because they're interested in becoming cattle ranchers, or because they want to become miners and they think that there might be gold and silver out west? So I want you to take a minute here, and in your notebook, I just kind of want you to jot this down. And so remember, at the beginning of each unit, we almost do a little pre-test just to see how much you already know about a topic. So in your notebook, I want you to draw these circles, something of this nature, and think about, why did people move west? And feel free to hit pause, and I want you to take a minute or so and jot down in these circles a couple of reasons why people might have went west. So go ahead and hit pause and jot some of those ideas down. All right, well, I'm assuming you're back now. And I'm really curious to see what you wrote down about what you think as far as reasons why people went west. And that's what we're going to talk today about, is what made people really want to go west before the Civil War, after the Civil War, and specifically we're going to be talking about cowboys and miners today. Today's focus is really going to be about miners and who these young men were. Did they actually, get rich? Did they make a fortune, a name for themselves? How did it impact America politically, economically, and socially? And we're probably going to get to cowboys more likely later this week as we're going through chapter 4, section 1, and then we'll be moving into section 2 on farmers, and eventually section 3 talking about the altercations which are going to erupt between farmers and ranchers and Native Americans who already live out west and say, hey, you forgot about us, we already live here. Now in these circles, obviously I have no idea what you put, but I'm assuming that you put something like trying to find gold, or trying to get rich, looking for cheap farmland, trying to make a name for themselves, escape their past, forget the Civil War, something like that. That's what I'm hoping you put into some of these circles here. And we're going to move into our PowerPoint notes. And so that was just kind of our pre-test. And if you're thinking to yourself, I didn't know anything, I had no idea why people moved west, that's okay too. It just means that you have more to learn this unit as we go through. And I'm hoping that, if you didn't take the time last chapter to watch the lectures, take the notes, you need to. You need to watch the lectures, take the notes. I suggest reading the book. Watching Crash Course sometimes helps. Making Quizlets, reviewing the content, especially if you notice that you didn't do as well on the first test as you would have liked. You need to ask yourself honestly, did you study for it? Did you play the Kahoot multiple times? Did you do all the questions on the review sheet? How ready really were you for that exam? So I'm going to switch over here to our PowerPoint notes. And remember, with our notes, you can feel free to write down as much as you want or as little as you want. That's up to you. But what we're getting into here is, I'm just calling this first section Looking Westward. This is part of our Westward Expansion unit. We're really going to be focusing on the period of time after the Civil War, which is really 1865 to about 1900. We'll also talk a little bit earlier this week, though, just today and maybe a little bit into next class, about what life was like prior to the Civil War and why people went west. And that's what that Crash Course extra credit opportunity this week is about as well. So as we go through today's lesson and into next class, our learning goals that I really want you to think about are this concept of manifest destiny. That's going to be one of your big vocab words this chapter. I'm going to be putting out a vocabulary assignment later this week. But you're going to have to understand that manifest destiny is this desire, this belief that it is it is destined for Americans to move west, that God has ordained it and planned it, and it's okay. And it basically becomes a justification and an excuse to kick out Native Americans and other people moving west so that they can have that land for themselves. So we're going to talk about why people wanted to move west and how it impacted the people who already lived there, and how it changed, the face of America politically, economically, socially. And today, as I said, we're really going to be focusing on in section 1 what life was like for miners, who these people were, did they actually get rich, what problems did they face, and how did they overcome them. We're probably going to be getting more into the cowboys and the ranchers next class as we finish up section 1, talking about the kind of the rise and the fall of what we call the cattle kingdom. And there will be an essay this chapter. A full essay is what Mr. Kreiner and I are kind of still debating if we're going to do the full one or a shorter version, but it's going to be about cowboys here. We're also going to be doing like a little mini project this chapter about cowboys as well. Ooh, that looks super blurry. I don't really like that. Oh, there you go. Okay. I just had to hit the thing, that's why. Yep, sometimes I'm not the brightest. What can I say? It's still Monday, and I've got to drink a lot more coffee, it looks like. So the big idea here is as more settlers moved west, mining, ranching, and railroads soon transformed the western landscape and the United States. And so the big focus here is that as people move west, this is going to lead to the creation of a transcontinental railroad, which is a topic that we've talked about at the very beginning of this class. I mentioned that there was a man by the name of Stephen Douglas. He was a senator from the state of Illinois. He actually ran for the U.S. Senate against Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln lost, and Stephen Douglas became the Illinois senator. They also ran against each other in 1860 for the presidency, but of course Lincoln won that one. So you can't win them all. And he was the one that wanted to create a railroad that went across the country. Well, ultimately that railroad is going to be built. And so that's going to be one of the big impacts of westward expansion. The other big impact of westward expansion is, of course, the displacement of Native Americans, the fact that they were allowed to live wherever they wanted. Because years ago, the U.S. government had said, the West is yours. Now they're going to be forced to move into small reservations with dry, what we call desolate land. I mean, you can't really grow anything there. And it's going to be very difficult for them to exist. We're going to see new developments because of how difficult it is to farm out west. And so new technology will be created to help improve mining as well as farming. And there's also going to be this idea that is created in some cases by people, by books, by the media, that is still around to this day, that somehow if you are this farmer, this cowboy, this miner, you are this lone ranger type of man, that you're this hero, that you're able to conquer anyone, that you're this tough guy, this image. And it still is portrayed to this day as people make westerns, this whole genre of movies and books about this anti-hero, so to speak, this person who's off on his own, saving the world, somewhat as a vigilante. So originally I had asked you guys at the beginning of this lesson why somebody might want to go west, and I was hoping that in your bubbles you would have put things such as they were looking for cheap land, because obviously if people already lived along the eastern coastline and down south, people already live there. So if they're going to sell that land, now that it's been proven that it is quite fertile, they're going to sell it at a high price. But out west, yes, Native Americans live there, but once the government basically kicks Native Americans out, brings in the army, offers up that land for basically free or cheap prices, which we'll talk about, hey, people are going to want to move west. And a lot of people want to move west, especially after the Civil War, because they're looking for a fresh start. They're looking for an escape, so to speak. They're looking to reinvent themselves, to forget about the fact that they'd killed their relatives, that they'd suffered so much loss and pain and destruction. Miners, of course, are going to move west because they think that they're going to get rich quick, that they're somehow going to find the whole motherlode of gold and silver and just, have this amazing life. And I think that's what we all hope. You have to remember that back then, there were no lottery tickets. So you're not going to get a scratcher at the gas station. Not that you can't yet, but you can once you're 18. Gambling's dangerous, so be careful with that. But it's not like you're just going to win the lotto and get rich. That didn't exist back then. So mining would kind of be like winning the lotto. African Americans are going to be interested in moving west because we talked in last chapter about how the KKK is ridiculous and it's lynching people and it's attacking people and it's harassing people and you can't go about your business. We read those primary sources, in document C about that man who wasn't able to leave the town and they shot his horse and they attacked him and a girl was almost beaten and killed. Who wants to deal with that? So some people say, I'm gonna leave. And so they're going to go west in hopes that there would be less racism there. Those people are what we call exodusters because they're on kind of an exodus. If you've heard of that word before, an escape, leaving. You think about the Exodus in the Bible if you're a religious person. That's kind of the escape here, so to speak. And in this case, they're escaping racism. And as I mentioned before, the Transcontinental Railroad will be built, trying to unite the country. It'll make it great to send goods, send products. People can travel, see the world, and that will create job opportunities as well. So I mentioned this term, manifest destiny. And if you think way back to 8th grade US history, you learned this in 8th grade history. So this beginning part is kind of a review. And the map there is kind of small, so I'll have another bigger map here in just a second. But ultimately, this term was created in the 1840s by a man by the name of John O'Sullivan. And when he coins or comes up with this term, he basically says, look, you can't stop destiny. You can't stop change. You can't stop God's will. And manifest means obvious, and destiny is referring to what is meant to happen. And so he basically says that it is God's will. It is meant to happen. It is obvious to everyone that the United States is supposed to expand from sea to shining sea. You just can't stop progress. And you shouldn't really even try. And so over time, the United States starts to grow. And of course, people want the United States to grow because it'll be considered more as a world power if it's larger. Potentially, it'll have, a chance to make more money. As we mentioned, you might get rich through gold or get farmland or be able to reinvent yourselves or escape. There's always another place to run. If you're a fugitive, hey, go out west. They'll never find you. It's not like today, right, with cameras and all sorts of things. So people loved the idea of going west. There's going to be people who are against manifest destiny because they say, well, what about the Native Americans who live there? What about the fact that there's dangers? What about the fact that there's no real law and order out west? There's no towns that are created. Other people love that sense of excitement and adventure. So there will be people who are against moving west, saying this will cause problems, especially since originally other European nations had claimed some of that land, but most people are pro-westward expansion. Now, this painting is created in the 1870s by John Gast. And this painting is all about American progress. So most people consider it the Manifest Destiny painting. It's actually called American Progress. And this, what looks like an angel, is actually supposed to be kind of this symbol of liberty. And this woman is supposed to be dressed, going back to the ideas of the Roman Republic. So she's supposed to be wearing more of the typical clothes of a woman from the Roman Republic, that she is bringing with her democracy and government. And the idea here is that as this woman, who is basically this symbol of American progress, she's supposed to be pretty much bringing civilized life to the West. You have to understand that in the 1870s, Americans, just like the rest of the world, definitely have this sense of superiority. Slavery in America has ended at this point, and African American men have the right to vote. But most people are still racist, and they definitely think that they are superior to other groups in the world. And so the painter of this feels this clearly as well. And you can see, if you're looking at the right side of the painting, it's supposed to show like the eastern seaboard, which is civilized life. And you can see the boats in the harbor, you can see the train. See how the painting is even lighter at the top? You've got the telegraph wires, and you've got some farmers out there, and of course a stagecoach. And then as this woman, this symbol of progress, is moving west, she's even got this star, she's supposed to be Lady Liberty, intensified here, kind of with these Roman Republic values. See how it's dark on the left side of the screen? So she is bringing light and truth and education and civilization to these natives. And you can see how they're supposed to be these natives who are perhaps scared, perhaps worried, perhaps angry, but uncivilized. And so it's supposed to be these men who are coming west. And so people are going to be coming as they are via train or via stagecoach, or, the old Oregon Trail days, via Conestoga wagon. And they might be farmers, or these men down here might be like miners. You might see a pickaxe there. And of course, they're just going to kick off those Indians. And so, yeah, this is a completely kind of biased view, but it is definitely a pro-manifest destiny kind of view, that they're going to be improving America. There's no thought that, perhaps other people already lived here. Their values, unfortunately, will be pushed to the side in the name of progress. Now, this week, as I mentioned, I've got an extra credit opportunity available for you through Edpuzzle. You don't have to do it to watch the crash course and answer the questions. Whatever questions you do answer correctly, you'll be getting points for. I haven't decided how many points yet. I'm still thinking about that. But if you watch the crash course, it's just a nice little review for you that obviously America expanded over time, right? Starting with the original colonies here, in Virginia and up into Massachusetts, and then eventually it spread into the 13 colonies. Florida was later gained in the Spanish Cession in 1819 as we bought that from the Spanish. And of course, as we fought the American Revolution, to gain our independence from England, we further moved west, right, over the Appalachian Mountains. And then there was some issues, some debates going on about, whether the British still owned land here or whether the French owned land. But ultimately, by the time we got up to the end of the American Revolution, this territory was technically all owned by America. It just wasn't settled yet into states. But nobody really crossed, the Mississippi River. As America really is being created by Washington and then into Adams and then into Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, of course, acquires the Louisiana Purchase, where he buys all this land from Napoleon, who is leader of France, because he's looking to take over the whole world. And then, of course, it doubles the size of the United States. And eventually Lewis and Clark with Sacagawea go out and explore this land. Now, this land they talk a lot about in the Crash Course video, that ultimately Texas was controlled by Mexico, and the people at the Alamo, they're fighting against General Santa Anna. They lose at the Alamo, but they eventually win. They force Mexico to give them their freedom, and for a few years, they are the Lone Star Republic. They didn't join the United States right away because they knew that would make people in Mexico angry, but eventually the U.S. does add Texas to the Union. And of course, that leads to a lot of anger and resentment between the U.S. and Mexico. Eventually, the U.S. makes a deal with Mexico, because the U.S. actually eventually goes to war with Mexico. And at the end of this war, of course, the United States naturally wins from the help of generals like George Winfield Scott. That's all in the Crash Course. And as part of that deal, there is the Gadsden Purchase, where we buy this piece of land separately. And all of this land is basically given or ceded to the United States as part of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ends the Mexican War. Now, Oregon, and Washington and Idaho all become U.S. territory. Later, that's kind of a separate deal, which is also talked in the Crash Course. We acquire that in some kind of territorial gains from Britain. We decided to there was some talk of going even further north into Canada, trying to get more land. James K. Polk had campaigned with this idea of 54-40 or fight. He wanted more land up north, but they just simply used a ruler, drew a line, and that's how we got the territory from east to west. Alaska comes later from Russia. Hawaii comes later in kind of a fight against the Hawaiian people. But that's how we're able to expand from sea to shining sea, so to speak. But if you watch the Crash Course, it'll be a nice kind of review of that in more depth. Now, what I really want to talk to you about, though, for a few minutes here is just mining. So Americans had always been interested in mining, and the first people who really became interested in mining were way back in 1848. And in 1848, of course, we know that John Sutter found gold. He wasn't that far from San Francisco or from Sacramento, California. And when he finds gold, this leads to a gold rush where people throughout California, throughout the West, and people around the world flocked to the United States and trying to get rich quick, which is why, of course, you've got the 49ers, right, as far as football teams. And you would see ads like this talking about, it's only going to take 35 days via this steamship to come to America. It's talking about when it's going to leave, how much it's going to cost. It's going to be the quickest, safest, cheapest passage. You can get there for $90 to ride on this boat for 35 days, and you can be able to come to the United States and you'll just get rich quick. Now, obviously, you're not going to be able to just become a millionaire overnight, but that's what they were pretty much claiming. And the population of states is going to go up dramatically during this time period. California goes from just being a small territory of less than 1,000 people to just a booming city overnight. And here's some color images so you can really see what I'm talking about, where people would talk about, ride our boat. It'll take 100 days to get to San Francisco, and obviously it would just depend on where you are coming from in the world. But people all over are going to be wanting to come to America. This is how California in particular gets a huge Asian population, because many people decide to leave China in search of a better life. There was a lot of problems going on in China at this point, as they were getting attacked by the British. There was about just on the verge of an opium war. And so people came to the US looking for a better life and to get rich quick. Now, that was the first real gold rush. And then, of course, it kind of fizzled out because not everybody got rich. But in the years after the Civil War, we're going to see that now that the war is fought, it's ended, it's clear the United States has supreme power, and we're going to start to see the people go out west looking for a better life, and we're going to start to see more and more people becoming interested in mining. Now, if you notice, these pictures of miners are all men because it's usually young men who become miners trying to strike it rich. Women usually follow later. Women would become laundresses, they would open up restaurants, they'd be waitresses, they'd even be paid to dance with men, they'd do all sorts of other illicit things. But, being a miner is a tough, difficult, almost violent job. It's not really the place for women, so to speak. They were considered more delicate at this time, and of course there is no equality, and it could be a dangerous life. So it's usually men who are miners looking to strike it rich quick. They're referred to as prospectors, which always reminds me of Toy Story and kind of that Stinky Pete, that prospector. Early prospectors usually would try to mine with like pan mining. So if you've ever taken, like you see in the picture here, if you've ever gone to the beach and you have one of those like pans and you try to pick up a bunch of sand and seashells and you kind of mix it into the water and you're trying to get rid of the extra sand there and then see if you picked up any seashells and you're panning, yeah, that's kind of the early method to look for surface deposits of minerals or early gold. Eventually, they're using placer mining, and they're using pickaxes, and they're using shovels, and they still have pans, and it's still basically all on the surface. Well, as you can imagine, that, once you get some people doing that in an area, and they're fighting over whose area is whose, if there is any gold, then it's pretty much on the surface through this mining method. It's going to be gone pretty fast. Over time, they're going to start using other methods for mining, and so they're going to start using what we call quartz mining, where they have to actually really and truly go beneath the surface, and they would dig. They're going to dig out huge kind of hollow areas as far as caves. They'd be very careful how they dug out these caves to go underground and look for gold, look for silver. Obviously, if they can cave in and they can all end up getting suffocated and die. So a lot of people get injured this way. It can be very difficult. Eventually, they'll start to use, dynamite and things like that to try to blow out more areas. But that would be difficult as well. You really have to know what you're doing. A lot of them, especially who are amateurs who are doing this and not working for a company, end up getting killed. A lot of them end up with lung disease or other issues related to that. Now, part of the reason why there was such a boom related to mining after the Civil War was because of Henry Comstock. Henry Comstock was out in Virginia City, Nevada, and he found a huge silver deposit. He was actually looking for gold, but he found a huge amount of silver, and that kind of led to another gold rush. Because most people didn't want to go out during the Civil War. Some people did, but it really leads to more people going out after the Civil War, and it leads to what we call the creation of boom towns, where, as I mentioned in California, it's going to be the same way in Nevada. You're going to go from a small town of a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 people, to before you know it, it's a bustling city of 30,000 overnight as people are looking for gold and silver. And so you're going to need a laundress. You're going to need a grocery store. They're going to have bars and saloons as far as entertainment and dance halls. And so all the things that you would think of in a normal town, a post office and a police department and a fire department, all of that will be created overnight, creating lots of jobs. And eventually, as the railroads are going to be created, they'll have, railroad stops where people can come off there and visit or travel or send their goods back and forth as people buy stuff via catalog. Now, these boom towns, as you see in the picture below, they're only booming as long as there's gold and there's silver. And so, as more and more people are coming into an area, they'd even have opera houses, and they're going to have newspapers and hotels and anything. But if the gold and silver dries up, the towns basically become abandoned, and they go from boom to bust, and they could potentially turn into what you think of as ghost towns. So that's a real thing. If you've heard that town before and you thought it was like, oh, it was just some myth that it was haunted, no, that's like a real thing, and it means more so that literally no one lives there. It went from 500 to 1,000 to 30,000 in 6 months, and then all of a sudden, 10 years later, it's back to only 500, 1,000 people. And that happened very quickly in some areas. Big boom towns during the 1860s, 1870s are Cherry Creek in Colorado. You've also got Pikes Peak in Colorado, Helena, Montana, Virginia City, Nevada, the Black Hills in South Dakota. But Tombstone, Arizona also goes into that category as well. Because these towns were getting formed so quickly, kind of overnight, there was lots of crime as immigrants came in, and there was this huge nativist response. Immigrants, as I mentioned, were coming from around the world to try to look for gold, silver, get rich quick, and Americans would say, "You're not a real American, get out of here." There was a lot of racial tensions and problems over that. People would fight over, this was my mine, no, this was my mine, especially if any gold or silver was found. And so with a lack of sheriff and police department, you would have these vigilance committees where people would take it upon themselves to walk around and keep the peace, which is also why you don't see a lot of women in these towns early on, because it was dangerous places, even with these vigilance committees being in place. As far as did people get rich, a few people did, but for the most part, it's going to be these large mining corporations which start to come in over time. And they start to come out with more efficient processes than just digging underground or, trying to, build some type of cave or mine to basically get out the material. They start using hydraulic mining, where they're going to be basically removing large amounts of earth, basically by spraying high-powered water, reminding me somewhat of a huge pressure washer, where they're just going to be washing away the soils to find the minerals. The problem with that is obviously it's bad for the environment. It leads to lots of silt, which is like the topsoil layer, and gravel, running into the waterways. It ruins farmland soil. The water can be mixed with some of the chemicals that they use, which makes the water undrinkable. So it's a real problem. And eventually, of course, modern mining today uses some of those methods, but it doesn't. Some of the largest mines that we have in America are out west, if you look into Idaho and places of that nature. And here's just some more pictures of what it kind of looked like in some of these mining towns. Now the big thing is, if you look, this is one of the images from our textbook. You can see all those gold bars, you can see all those silver bars, and basically this is going to lead to statehood, because if an area goes from 500 to 1,000 people overnight, now they have enough people to write a state constitution, to apply for statehood. It's how you eventually get, Pikes Peak and Denver to become big cities, as people were looking for silver there. I mentioned Tombstone, Arizona. That gets a lot of people. That's how Wyatt Earp, as the sheriff there, became famous at the shootout at the OK Corral, because he was trying to keep peace in Tombstone between a couple of different families who were fighting over ranching, but as well as mining claims. Idaho, as I mentioned, has a huge mine out there, and so that becomes a state in 1890, and eventually Arizona became a state in 1912. So it takes a long time for these places to actually apply for statehood. Just some more pictures. You can see some of the smaller miners who are poor off on their own, kind of what the towns looked like. And so if we're talking about the impact of mining on America, just to wrap things up today, of course, all of this new gold and silver leads to an influx of money in America's economy. So that's going to lead to, if people have money, they're shopping, okay? They are buying stuff. So you've got more department stores are going to be starting to be created, and they're going to be making goods, and they're going to be hiring people. America seemed like it was doing well. The rest of the world wanted to invest in us. The amount of the dollar goes up in terms of our world economy. An interest of other countries in the U.S. They wanted to buy land here and invest in America. And it made us really kind of look like another world power, especially as we expanded physically and got more land and turned it into states, but also our economy is improving with increased wealth. And it leads to more people, of course, going west, and it leads to new towns and such. And it's also, of course, going to lead to more problems with the Native Americans. All right, so I hope that you learned a couple of things today. We're not going to do a formal exit slip today, but I want you to think about some things that you learned as far as maybe different mining methods or problems miners faced, or vigilance committees, or from boom to bust. And I hope that you're having a great day and not feeling very stressed, but do that extra credit, start reading, start getting on track here with our new chapter. And if you haven't finished your thesis yet, get her done. That's it for now, guys. Have a great day.